Welcome to the Magical Salon, where two regular people, Amanda and James, explore mystical ideas and big questions. From books to pop culture, if it's a doorway to something deeper, we're probably into it. We're not experts, and maybe you aren't either, but that's kind of the point.
Greetings and welcome back to another episode of the Magical Salon. I am James, your resident alchemist, joined with my co-host.
I'm Amanda, and I am the magic they called a meltdown, the knowing they called noise.
This week's theme, madness or magic. A lot of people in history that make history and that are in the history book are straddling the line of, are they performing magic to do what they are doing, or are they just insane? Are they mad? And we thought that would be an interesting topic just to kind of touch on how a lot of people, specifically people that are kind of in retrospect looked upon favorably, at the time are not favorably viewed at all. So just for an example, somebody that I thought of with magic and madness, Joan of Arc, a 17-year-old in like the 1400s maybe, who helped the French country push England out as oppressors. She led an army in the 100 Years' War, and her efforts are like attributed with helping like improve morale and turn the tide. And she claimed to have had visions, divine visions from God that were inspiring her and leading her.
What kind of visions did she have?
I don't know exactly, but it's more just, and that kind of idea comes up a lot of these people have visions or claim to have visions. But I just thought Joan of Arc specifically is really fascinating because she's a saint now, right? She was executed. She was burned at the stake for being a heretic, and now she's a saint, which I think just goes to the whole madness or magic. Like, at the time, people loved her, and like she literally rallied troops to like win some important battles, and then was burned at the stake later, probably because she was getting too much power.
Well, it's interesting because I think part of the reason she was burned at the stake is twofold in my mind. And I don't know like that much about it, but from what I can tell, it's because she had these divine visions, which I don't think was that unusual for the time period. But the unusual part about it was that she actually heeded them. Like, she received the vision and then acted on them. So that's also interesting if you think about it in terms of her success, to your point. Like, she led troops and she was successful and did all this stuff and then was burned at the stake by the age of 19, right? So it's like she accomplished a lot in a very short span of time. So the other reason, though, is because she wore men's clothing a lot, and so she was pretty well known for that, but that was like heretical for the time.
Yeah, that was like one of the things that I think the church even used against her. Like, that was against biblical law. Like, women could not dress like men, which in some ways she's kind of like front-running androgyny almost.
I don't know like her rationale. Like, whenever I first heard about that, I just assumed that she was wearing men's clothing either because she couldn't wear women's clothing to fight and do all the things that she wanted to do, or she was pretending to be a man so that she would get more esteem and respect and therefore be able to lead some of these troops and have people follow her that may not have otherwise. So I'm not really sure which it was.
Going back to the idea of madness, she claimed to have visions. Her detractors said that she wasn't hearing gods or saints, because I think she claimed to see like Saint Michael or somebody. Her opposers said those aren't saints, they're demons you're listening to. You're performing witchcraft. And that was how they justified killing her as well. The church even didn't dispute the visions. They just disputed who she was communing with in the visions. It's a very subtle distinction.
But a big one. Like, it's also interesting because specifically, like, depending on the time, but even still now, like, I think magic, even just talking about it, let alone practicing it or openly talking about things in some of these spaces, it's sort of like a break from their traditional norms and modes of thinking and being. And historically, any break from the norm was considered verging into like bad territory. Like if you verged away from the norms, then you were at risk of being a heretic no matter what, right? Because you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing and what everybody else is doing. But that could also just be considered like, oh, you have free thought and you're exercising it.
Yeah, at what point is it you're just self-empowered and going your own way regardless of convention? You're just living your true life, which at the time is very antithetical to the status quo. But in some ways, they're just ahead of their time, these people. They had ideas that at the time, even Copernicus, like, oh, the sun is the center of the universe, not the earth. All of these people come up with ideas, and they are heretical for introducing an idea that is against the dogma or the doctrine that the society is built upon. And it takes a very long time for that society to acknowledge, okay, we were wrong, because people don't like being wrong. And that also has to then trickle through all of society on every level to incorporate these changes. Even education, when we were in school, Pluto was a planet. A lot of people still call it a planet, or like,
oh, it's still a planet to me.
so in how many decades or generations will it take for people to stop considering it a planet? Even in jest.
The common thread between magic and so-called madness, which you might call mental illness today, or symptoms of a mental illness, the through line is control, I feel like. And that's in some ways what both of those ways of being kind of have in common. Society and the system want to make you operate under certain conditions, and if you can't operate under those conditions or you refuse to, then you're no longer really welcome. I mean, a really famous example in terms of like controlling someone with mental illness, and it's kind of debated whether she even had mental illness, but Rosemary Kennedy, JFK's sister, basically from the sound of it, like she was just an outspoken young woman who maybe was difficult from a parenting perspective. And so they like basically lobotomized her, and then she became like she couldn't speak intelligibly anymore. Like she was completely different, right? But it's like that was definitely like a control thing.
A lot of magic is associated with hucksters, trickery, conning people. Specifically the David Blaine's, Chris Angel, Houdini. It's like they're just tricking you. They're sleight of hand. They're kind of getting you when they're doing the act. They're conning you. So I think that's partly where magic gets a bad rap, because it's associated with cheating in some ways, or you're using things that not everybody has access to. Therefore, it's unfair.
Well, but everybody has access to it. It's almost like everybody has like a little toolbox in the back of their closet, but not everybody is willing to open it.
Rasputin, who we talked about, we have not on the pod though, was somebody that came up in Russia. I guess it was probably the Soviet Union because it was in the early 1900s. Rasputin was a weird person that you always hear about in books because people claimed he was a magician or he had some type of religious revelation or experience at, I think when he was like 28 or later-ish in life. And then he became like, again, he had visions and he had this spiritual awakening. He then became somehow affiliated with the Russian elite, even though he did not come from those circles at all, to the point that he was a healer to the Tsar and their family specifically because of his alleged power. Obviously, detractors said that's heretical. He's a con, a fraud. He's like brainwashing the leaders. He's conning our own leaders are being tricked by a huckster, kind of. So he's eventually assassinated. But even his assassination, there's a lot of myth in it, being, oh, he was poisoned. They invited him over. They gave him this drink. He was drinking it, but he wasn't affected. So then they gave him more poison. He was still unaffected. Eventually they shot him. Allegedly, he still didn't die. So then they shot him again and again. And then he finally died, right?
more broadly, there's a few things that kind of immediately come to mind in terms of that parallel. And I think shamans are one example, because shamans, a lot of, like across cultures, people who are shamans will have like visions and dreams and like sometimes hallucinations or disassociation, mania, a lot of different types of experiences and different types of reality, I guess you could say, depending on like where they're positioned in the world. Like sometimes that was perceived as a spiritual crisis or spiritual calling. Like sometimes it was a crisis that needed to be worked through, and after you worked through it, kind of like Jung's unconscious, once you did the shadow work and you worked through those unconscious elements, then you were coming out of the other end of it transformed in some way. And there's something interesting there to think about in terms of like even just the way that they kind of treat mental health conditions in this day and age. It's like, oh, we're going to prescribe you this medicine, but it's not really a holistic approach, which could include spirituality, right? So I don't think it's really so cut and dry, as we need to really try and separate what is magic from what may be symptoms of mental illness. It's like, how is it actually affecting your life? But also, I feel like, and again, nothing's so black and white.
I was thinking when you were talking about shamans, so there's a lot of cultural differences that happen too throughout history. So Joan of Arc, obviously the English don't like her because she helped defeat them in battle for the French. So then contrast that with voodoo and stuff. A lot of it is people are doing something that even in the community is accepted. So a shaman or a medicine man, a guru, like the hermit living in the mountain that the people go to for wisdom, the sage. It's not uncommon for cultures, villages throughout history to have had somebody that was a bit eccentric or odd, but still looked upon favorably. But to an external culture, specifically like Western culture going into some foreign places to colonize it, that's a threat to you. You don't understand why a village is admiring this shaman person that gives them medicine through, oh, everybody goes there once a year to this place and they do a ritual where they eat a mushroom or ayahuasca. What is that? Like, we can't allow that. Like, that's witchcraft, heresy. But you can instead go to our churches and you can pray there and talk to our God, but you cannot worship your own independent God. That's magic and witchcraft. This is religion and God. It's a made-up arbitrary line of where the magic versus madness, where is it, right? It's a spectrum depending on who's looking at it, kind of, in some ways.
Well, yeah, and it's totally a control thing. Because beyond just the pure parallels of like, you need to worship our God as a colonizer figure, I mean, it goes back to like capitalism and consumerism and stuff. Oh, if we route you through the medical and scientific communities, then like we can get money from you. But if you just like visit this person that you know on an interpersonal level and exchange and like you figure out your own arrangement with them and they help you in some deeper way, like
How are we going to monetize that?
Well, going back to the magic idea though, even mad scientist is a phrase. Frankenstein, in my mind, kind of is dealing with this because it's a mad scientist that creates life, and it's Victor Frankenstein is the person, which it gets confusing just because people don't know Frankenstein's not actually the monster. But regardless, science and magic have a very, in my mind, interrelated connection going back. So alchemy, for instance, which we could potentially do an episode on, I think is kind of delving into the madness versus magic. So historically, alchemy, in a lot of ways, it was like the forefather to a lot of modern science, specifically chemistry. And in old alchemy, going back to like, I think Egypt had alchemy, the Middle Ages, alchemists were a thing, and they were viewing the material and spirit worlds as being linked. So then the idea from an alchemist perspective that you always hear about is turning metal into gold. I can take this crappy iron worth nothing and I will turn it into gold. That's magic. That's how alchemists are looked upon. But that's considered silly. Nobody could do that. What are you doing? You're just wasting a bunch of resources, mixing all this stuff in your lab. It's fruitless. Nowadays, we can make synthetic diamonds. So in some ways, it's come full circle. This thing that people scoffed at.
It's not gold though.
I'm just saying the idea of manufacturing very rare, allegedly, rare items is now a reality. We can make more pure diamonds artificially than you can find in nature now. We have almost perfected nature to that level, specifically for diamonds. And I'm sure they can probably make gold by now, right?
But is it even the same thing? That's an interesting theoretical question, or maybe it's more of a philosophical question. If you take something, like think about a diamond, it's a synthetic diamond, but it's not an actual diamond, right? It is not, it looks the same, but it is not the same thing, nor is it created in the same processes. And I feel like, so if you are able to take metal and make it into gold, is that actual gold, or is it just the illusion of gold, going back to the idea of the huckster and conning? And it might even be so real that nobody would ever know the difference, but is it the same thing? I don't know.
But then does it matter if you can't discern the difference? But I think the idea, though, from alchemy always interests me because it's a mixer. Historically, it was a mixture of metaphor with chemistry. And so nowadays when you read it, it's like one dragon's bone mixed with frogwort or something, like in these old spells. Old alchemy stuff looks like spells, but it's also just ingredients like chemistry. 2 drops of ammonium sulfate mixed with this or that, and then you can create this compound, which you can use to do this. So it's like alchemy in the modern parlance is made up bunk. It's not real. But it also is directly related to modern science and chemistry. And that's kind of fascinating to me, how just over time it was leveraged. So there is some truth to the alchemy.
I thought alchemy, in addition to being a physical pursuit with a tangible object, I also thought it was the pursuit of spiritual insight, essentially. So if you obtain the Philosopher's Stone, which is making gold, you are also supposed to have an inner transformation that will be echoed by the external transformation of metal into gold, right? Is that not the idea?
I think it is. And that's the whole idea of the Philosopher's Stone comes from alchemy. It's not a physical stone. And the whole idea of the Philosopher's Stone is you make something, if you perfect matter / yourself as matter, because you are a person, you're made of matter, you can reach or attain immortality. And so the alchemist Philosopher's Stone is to be a perfect being.
So it's about immortality, not about gold?
Yes, but it's not literally about living forever. I think it's about, so think of the people like Joan of Arc, for instance, will probably be remembered forever at this point. Now that we have the internet and stuff, she made it into the history books. I don't see her ever getting written out of the history books. Like, that will just be cataloged as a thing throughout history forever now going forward. So in some ways, is she not immortal now? Immortalized. She's a saint by the church.
It also seems wrong for the church to make her a saint after literally burning her at the stake.
In the time, and I was thinking about that too, all of these people like Joan of Arc, Rasputin, they are shaping the world we live in today. And they were hated at their time to some people. They were killed, persecuted. They were the outcasts of their time.
Well, it doesn't strike me as that odd, if only because there's always people who are kind of, they're shapers, right? They are looking at the world and seeing the changes that need to be taken, and they're like, well, if nobody else is going to do it, I'm going to do it. That immediately puts them at odds with all these other people because they're going against the status quo, and it all goes back to who's holding the power and the control. If you're a shaper, no matter how you're trying to shape, whether it's politically or socially or with magic, somebody's going to try and stamp you out, right? Because they want to uphold the status quo because they're benefiting from it.
In one of the earliest, maybe the first episode, I talked about how technology is magic. Somebody in my research that came up was Pythagoras as magic or madness. Pythagoras is going back to BC Greece, where they're doing all this math. Obviously, everybody's heard of the Pythagorean theorem in math and like trigonometry or whatever class you had to take that in, geometry. Pythagoras was considered a cult leader. He had a school of people. He was very paranoid. He viewed numbers not as just letters on paper. He viewed them as sacred principles of reality itself.
Well, they are though, because if you think about it in terms of like think back to our episode about Carl Sagan, where he was like, okay, we need to come up with some way to convey a universal message. The only universal language there is the language of math and science, i.e. numbers. So there is something to be said for that's the underlying fabric of reality is numbers. It doesn't present to us as numbers, but it is numbers.
But yeah, so Pythagoras kind of bridged the gap, so to speak, of science with spirituality, because he didn't look at the numbers as purely scientific and no relation to the spirit world. He viewed them as divine, the fundamental building blocks of everything, which is different than, oh, I'm just going to count how many ounces of gold I have, therefore I'm richer than that person. He was looking at it as divine. Even doing math was a sacred exercise. It's a completely different worldview to go from that, where somebody's legitimizing this and also giving it more importance than most people at that time. And now everything is numbers, right? Like to your point, computers and everything that run our world are speaking in a different language, programming language.
It's kind of a shame that you don't learn some more of these details within school because, like, for example, you learn the Pythagorean theorem, whatever the heck it's called. But you don't really learn, or I didn't learn anything really about Pythagoras as the person, let alone that there was like this connection with the divine and the universe. It's kind of just a disservice in terms of the way that you learn things in school because it strips it of all of its meaning. I feel like everybody would be more interested to hear some of the context, if there is context around some of these principles. It's even like we kind of talked in a previous episode, like who invented algebra? Like why was that created? It might be nice to know some of that.
Well, I'm sure we might have learned about it, but to your point, it's interesting. The people that come up with this are viewing it in a completely different way than it's presented to you when you learn it. They aren't viewing it as just some numbers, 2 + 2 = 4, whatever. The context behind it is like 2 is a sacred number. And when you add 2 to another 2 sacred things, you get another sacred 4. It's a universal divine law by a higher being. Like, just the significance that you're imbuing just simple equations with is fundamentally different than in school. You're not viewing it as a divine symbol. It's just it's a number, whatever, 2 + 2. It doesn't mean anything to you. It's lost all of the context underlying the importance. Thinking the other day, specifically relating to madness or magic and kind of odysseys as the hero's journey. So think of these people, even if you are not necessarily a current day hero, you need to imagine or believe that you are. So you need to think you are having a breakfast of champions every day, but not as a metaphor. You need to live with that conviction and confidence to believe it and therefore be it being a champion in this case, by eating, consuming, and ritualizing a routine that allegedly helps you achieve something that will result in your becoming and maintenance of or maintaining of your hero and champion status. So in some of these things, to become a god, from a Crowley perspective, you have to believe you are the god. So Pythagoras believes these numbers are divine.
It goes back to the David Hawkins and the map of consciousness, where depending on where you're positioned on the map, you do literally see reality in a different way. So, and I think, I mean, and it's kind of a bit of a disservice to say that that's only true in the mind of Crowley, because in just in magic in general, like one of the key operating principles is as above, so below. And if it's true in my mind, it's true in the mind of God and vice versa. So, yeah, I mean, that does take belief, because in order for anything else to work, you have to have that core unwavering belief.
To that point of you have to believe you're a champion and the breakfast of champion, we are so inundated with metaphor, but we don't consider what it is actually supposed to be symbolizing. And it's everywhere. Even in sports, you're suiting up.
A lot more things are rituals than people think. For example, like when you think of ritual, I think you think of, like some kind of a weird animal sacrifice altar sort of situation. And that's not obviously the case at all. Like, even just think about going into church and lighting a candle for someone. That's a ritual. Just going to church in general, that's a ritual. A birthday celebration is a ritual. And I would also say a routine is a ritual. So, like, I'm thinking about, because when you were talking about the Breakfast of Champions, I kind of was thinking about Michael Phelps. I mean, he won a lot of different Olympic medals, but I remember sort of being younger and like watching these videos, or yeah, I think it was a video where he was like going through like the day in his life, and it would show like how much food he was eating. But it was all like, I mean, it was tasty stuff, right? Like, I guess somebody prepared it for him. But to your point, it was like, here's all the elaborate stuff that he's eating and what he's doing. But it's like there's something to be said for doing that before you have any success, because that is part of having success.
Yes, it's going back to be a champion, you need to do everything a champion does. But not just I have to do the step.
You have to believe it. Belief is the most important principle of all of it.
Yes, because everybody can practice, but if you just, so to make it to the NFL, it's statistically impossible. Like if you look up all the stats, you have a 1 in a billion. I'm making that up because that's not, but it's very improbable. Yet every day people do make it, and some people have incredible careers in the NFL lasting for decades of high-level performance in any sport. They're defying all the odds. And it's not just as simple as, oh, just practice every day and you'll be Mickey Mantle. It's like, well, he also had to probably believe, like Michael Jordan had a cutthroat mentality because he truly believed he was the best, though. It's not just he practiced hard. He was also really good and he did practice really hard, but it's also radical self-belief, which kind of delves into madness, right? Are you insane? Are you just like, even Jeff Bezos founding Amazon, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, all these people that are billionaires, they dropped out of prestigious universities that people would kill to get into. And they were like, yeah, I'm just going to go and make computers out of my garage. That's radical self-belief. That's insane. If they weren't successful and you knew Mark Zuckerberg now and he was just a loser that dropped out and flamed out and now he's working at Starbucks, not that there's anything wrong with that, but now he's not the person he is today, it's like, wow, he was dumb. Why did you do that?
I mean, it ultimately comes back to, what do you have to do in this life? Like, what do you feel called to do? And what would you do even if you knew for sure you were going to fail, right? But I feel like that's part of it, right? Because you have so much self-belief, and you have talent, and you have, rigor and structure, and you're doing all the things that you should be doing, right? Like, but there are plenty of people who they do all those things and it still doesn't pan out for them. But I guess I'm saying that doesn't mean that they failed, right? Or maybe on paper they failed, but it's still radical self-belief, and it's living authentically because you're doing what you feel like most brings you joy. Like, people are so obsessed with goals and destinations, but it's like, if you live a life full of journey and you appreciate that, there's something to be said for that.
Well, I guess that's interesting because I guess the way I was framing it made it sound like I was equating you need to succeed in the goal, and if you don't, then you didn't believe hard enough, which isn't what I'm saying. In some ways, what I'm actually saying is by doing the ritual and by every day you believe you are a champion when you eat your breakfast of champion, just for the easy example, your life becomes more meaningful with your built-in rituals that you do every day. So, every day I go and work out. I'm Hercules when I'm working out, right? I'm maintaining my physique, even though I'm just a middle-aged person. It's my personal record, but nobody's going to be impressed with. I don't lift that much weight, but it's for me. I set a record. I am improving on my own life and my personal strength. Kind of going back to he who competes with no one cannot be competed with. But if you are embodying and believing in yourself, and these things are reinforcing your own belief, you're more likely to be enjoying your life, regardless of if the goal, quote unquote, is materializing. I was thinking of rituals, though, to your point, for church. Baptism, that's a ritual. Even communion is a ritual. There's just everything is kind of ritualized that you don't really notice. Even cars, like, oh, you turn your blinker on when you get over.
That's because humans are inherently ritualistic animals. Just think about like doing certain, even having a daily routine of any kind is a ritual. Like think about our dogs. Like they don't necessarily, if they had free reign, would they do the same things at the same times of day? No, I don't think so. To a certain extent, maybe they would sleep during certain times of the day, but they wouldn't like go from task to task in a certain order every day like humans do.
But do humans naturally do that? Or is that a function of the system wanting you to live in a rigid 24-hour structure, working from 8 to 5? It's kind of forcing you to be ritualized because of the clock and your job. So it's kind of external things are forcing a ritual, or at least a schedule. Because did people even view life as tasks historically?
Even throughout history, like there are just certain things that have to be done at certain times of the day. Like maybe you get up and you wash your face, or like you get up to feed your child in the morning, or it's time to cook a meal. Like I just think there are some basic things that are part of a daily routine. Like if you think about it even in a less structured way, then we're more likely to think about it as. And there's a difference, I would say, between having a routine and a schedule, right? A schedule is everything is a task and there's no room to deviate. Whereas a routine, like there could be plenty of time still for intuitive action, even if you still had, certain touch points to the day that you always kind of did.
That's interesting. I'm even just thinking of like magic, I think you can find everywhere. A ritual is kind of magical. A church service where you turn the wafer into the body of Christ as a metaphor. Is it madness or is it magic? If it's just two people doing that in a basement, that's a cult. You have 800 people doing it in a giant auditorium, it's normal. It's you're communing with God. It's a religion. Again, where is the line? And throughout history, Tesla, people thought he talked about aliens. Nikola Tesla, who was like the competitor to not Einstein, Edison, he talked about vibrations as underlying everything. He's like 369, that's the secret to the universe or something. So he said a lot of esoteric, occulty things, and he's very famous and prominent for some of his ideas. Even Da Vinci came up with mock drawings of helicopters and stuff that would not come to fruition for literally 500 plus years, more than that.
And I can't remember where I heard this about Da Vinci, but maybe it was on that Very Ape podcast where they were just talking about Da Vinci. Like, I mean, he drew like a bunch of stuff. Like he was like always drawing and just like perceiving and observing the world and chronicling it. But I guess like if he got stuck, he would just sort of like go somewhere, sit and look at something. It's basically like through focused observation, you'll see something that you've always seen in a new way because you're focused on it. And that can kind of jolt you out of a rut that you may be in, creative or otherwise.
Humans can get stuck. Think of, again, from a science example, Eureka, I've got it, light bulb moment. How does that happen? It happens because they're working on something else. Or it's like, oh, Isaac Newton's trying to think of what gravity is, and then an apple literally falls and hits him on the head. And he's like,
Oh my goodness.
Sure, that didn't actually happen.
that's how actual ideas come, though. Like, how many times when you're writing or even doing something where you're just sitting there or you're looking out the window and then an idea pops out of nowhere into your mind and you're like, I've got to write that down. That's a good idea. Or, oh, I should ask so-and-so about that. That's a good thought that I just had. Where did it come from? It just like, poof.
That's what I'm saying. That's why I believe that that is channeling to a certain extent. So like when you're writing and a great idea, and sometimes it's almost like it's imparted to you as a form of insight rather than, it's not like an idea pops in your head, at least for me. It's more like a knowing that kind of comes over you. And then, you start writing or whatever. But I feel like ideas, when people come up with these inventions, are a similar way. Like, I think you're pulling it from the fourth dimension or like from the divine or whatever. It's something being imparted to you, but you have to be open to it. And I also think there's, as we've spoken about, if you're waiting for inspiration and creativity to strike, you'll be waiting forever. There is a discipline aspect. You have to be sitting there open to inspiration in order for it to strike, I think. Like if you are really just waiting, like I'm gonna wait until my magnum opus idea comes to me, then it's like you're not actually doing anything in the present moment. You're just waiting around for something that may or may not come. You have to kind of create the conditions for something to come to you.
Well, yeah, like your magnum opus will not magically appear. Dali doesn't make the perception of time or whatever that one, the melting clocks, if he doesn't ever paint. If he just waits for the perfect idea to come up in his mind, that doesn't do anything. You have to create it at some point. You have to do, which goes to the whole being and becoming. But thinking of channeling, Crowley famously channeled.
Who?
Aleister Crowley.
No, I mean like channeled what?
Some of these like ancient Egyptian gods and stuff and some of these texts that he wrote. But the idea of channeling comes up a lot, which we should probably do an episode to look into more because I feel like we've discussed it quite a few times now. But I kind of think the idea of channeling, it's radical self-conviction. So it's like, are they insane or are they actually channeling God? Even Joan of Arc claimed she was divinely acting. And then she went to court, and that's partly, she was tried. That's partly why there's that much known about her. And in those trials, she was adamant, and they were kind of trying to trick her and get her to self-identify as being a heretic. Or even Jesus, he believed he was the Son of God, so then he was treated like it and persecuted, but then he remained steadfast. They could have, I'm sure they're, through all these things, they're like, we're torturing you, just say you're not, and we'll let you go. It's very simple, but it's like, well, no, I know I'm right, so screw you, I'm not going to say no.
Yeah, and it's actually interesting because are you familiar with the idea of stigmata?
I think you should give a primer.
Yeah, so stigmata is specifically associated with Catholicism. It's when people, basically the marks from Jesus's crucifixion appear on them. So like bleeding nail holes in their palms and in the tops of their feet. And sometimes like bleeding around the crown where the crown of thorns was. So like back in the day, like we're talking a long time ago, like I don't know, I can't even put a year on it, but it was considered like a kind of like a mark of honor. It was like a sign that you're holy if you have stigmata, because you would only get, if you were very elevated on the map of consciousness, if you're like a transcended being closest to God, then you'd be more likely to have these stigmata appear. But it's interesting because like people like the Catholic Church would vilify shamans, for example. But it's like this is the same thing, just repackaged and of your own people, which is the key thing. Saint Francis of Assisi or whatever, that guy had stigmata. But now, like you go on the Wikipedia page and it's like scientists say it's attributed to, psychological issues or X, Y, and Z. And it's like, okay, well, it's just interesting how over time, even these perceptions of what is magic and what is madness, what is God talking versus are you schizophrenic, for example?
They were going back throughout history and saying, oh, well, so-and-so was insane. Like, they were just hallucinating all these visions. And it's like, well, maybe so, but that's the foundation of a religion now. The world is literally shaped by that person that you're now telling me is this. You're just trying to go back and rationalize why they did X, Y, and Z. Why is kind of irrelevant at this point. They did it. And it's actively shaping the world still. It's currently shaped it to where we are today, and it is actively shaping it into the future still. It's a living thing amongst humans, which I have a quote for the weekly wisdom relating to this. And this comes from William Blake, who also was claimed to be crazy in his time. He was a poet. His quote was, "Men forgot that all deities reside in the human breast," which again, all gods live because people collectively believe in them.
Well, it's like all gods reflect their believers, that quote. Specifically in these magic books, they talk about sort of inducing a trance state or, gnosis or whatever you want to call it. There's a certain state of mind or mindlessness that you go into, and then that's kind of the best time to practice magic. But you kind of, people will be doing like drugs, they'll be burning certain materials, doing all this stuff. So they might be sort of like, they don't have all their faculties intact, but that's part of it. You're leaning in, and because of that, you're kind of creating the experience, but you're also having an experience because you're leaning into having an experience. So it's like, at what point is your mind creating it, or are you just open to it? You know what I mean? Like, so that's an interesting element as well.
Anyways, if you're bored, go do something, create something. Think about magic.
And if you wake up with stigmata, take pictures, send it to the Pope.
I don't know if that's a good idea. You'll probably be considered mad, and we know how that turns out.